future of hundreds of thousands of young immigrants is thrown into chaos this week as the Trump administration ditches the DACA program. While local political and education leaders vow to protect them, mixed messages from the president have some wondering, will he or won't he revisit the issue if Congress fails to come up with a replacement? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Chris Genuine, editor and publisher of the Times of San Diego. Hi, Chris.
Hi, great to be here, Mark.
Good to have you back again. Former Los Angeles Times reporter Tony Perry. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. Reporter Kate Morrissey of the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Kate.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And Art Castañares, a publisher of La Prensa. Hi, Art.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. Well, brought here as children, they've grown up in America, the only country they've known. Roughly a quarter of the 800,000 undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers reside in California. DACA is short for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a program set up in 2012 by the Obama administration to temporarily protect those brought here illegally by their parents, protect them from deportation. The Trump administration said this week that DACA would be winding down in 6 months, but hedged on whether this is definitely the end of DACA. Here's a clip that starts with Trump and tracks some of the back and forth on DACA this week.
We love the Dreamers. We love everybody. Thank you very much.
We are people of compassion and we are people of law. But there is nothing compassionate about the failure to enforce immigration laws.
I really believe wants to take care of the situation. Really believe it. Even very conservative members of Congress, I've seen it firsthand. If they don't, we're going to see what we're going to do.
I'm hoping and I'm praying, and I don't say that as a cliche. I am praying that the president really cares about the Dreamers and that we're going to pass this bill.
And that was President Trump, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, and it's been a wild ride on this issue all week. Now the president says he hopes Congress can find a solution, something it's failed to do in 16 years. A lot to talk about here, and we'll get into the complicated politics in a minute. But Kate, start with a little bit of nuts and bolts here. It's, as we say, it's a very complicated issue, and a lot of people talking about a lot of things on it this week. What are the requirements for the DACA participants, and what are the benefits for those people?
Sure. So people who were eligible for DACA had to have come to the U.S. before they were 16 years old, and between a certain set of years. It was a limited group out of the larger group that we think of as Dreamers, people who were brought here as children. They also had to be either enrolled in school, graduated from school, have a GED, something to that effect showing they're pursuing their education. They also had to do background checks, show that they had no significant criminal history. They're fingerprinted every time they apply for this thing. So they have to do a lot in terms of that as well. And like you said, it protects them from deportation. It's sort of a 2-year renewable promise from the federal government that they will not be deported. It also makes them eligible to apply to work in the U.S. with permission. So that was the other really big benefit for this program. All
right. And Chris, why this week? What's with the timing with the Attorney General, of course, the President this weekend ending DACA?
Well, DACA was facing a legal challenge. It was led by the state of Texas, and initially there were 9 other states involved, although Tennessee later dropped out because Tennessee cited the human component of it. But it was to come to a head on Tuesday, the day of the announcement. If the DACA program hadn't been rescinded that day, then the 9 remaining states would challenge the government in court. So Attorney Jeff Sessions, Trump had said throughout the campaign that he wanted to end DACA. So doing this appeased his base. But Attorney General Jeff Sessions also believed he couldn't defend it. So the decision was to end it and to toss it to Congress.
Okay, and now, Tony, there's a lawsuit on the other side just to show how contentious this is. Some state attorneys general in New York this week.
Indeed, yeah, gentlemen, start your attorneys. There is a court case in New York. Someone who is a Dreamer and feels he was mistreated by the rules, and that's going through the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund. They're part of it. ACLU, of course, is close by. Now, it is worth saying that DACA has never fully been to court, both sides will tell you, and so we really don't know. Now, when President Obama went to expand DACA to be not just the Dreamers, the children, but the parents who have children who are legal American residents, that is to say, they may have come here, the parents as undocumented, but then they have children here and they become American citizens. Obama tried to expand the program to include them. Texas sued. A Texas judge issued a stay, and then he was upheld by a judge in New Orleans. And then, of course, the Supreme Court in 2015 was then split 4-4 between Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives. So no decision there. So we've not really had a decision on whether DACA is legal or whether it was an overreach, whether the initial president, Obama, overreached and did not comply with what they call the administrative procedure. Because while the president has enormous power, it isn't unlimited. You have to go through certain procedures, certain hoops, if you will. We'll find out as this litigation doubtless hits the courts whether President Obama did so.
And it's not clear that that DACA wouldn't have survived. The leading party in this case was Texas, and its attorney general has a lot on his own plate. He faces serious felony charges related to securities fraud. And Texas is certainly going to have its hands full with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. So it's not clear that Texas, as the leader, would have a lot of time to pursue this.
I wanted to talk, now we talked about, Kate, earlier on, some of the requisites and what how the program was set up. But what if we found folks who've looked at the Dreamers themselves, this group of roughly 800,000 people? Who are they? A lot of them are educated, and they're getting good paying jobs, et cetera?
Right. So there have been several studies done by actually local professor Tom Wong out of UC San Diego that have found that there's a significant increase in wages for Dreamers who participate in the DACA program. They are very likely to buy their first cars, buy their first homes, move to jobs that are more in line with what they went to school for. So so that side of the argument says, well, those are really positive contributions to our economy, so they're able to contribute more fully once they have DACA.
And yet one of the criteria that Attorney General Sessions announced this week was they're a drain and they're taking away American jobs, which it seems to me a lot of critics have pointed out that this is kind of a false statement because it's not one for one. Someone gets a job as a teacher, let's say someone else doesn't get a job as a teacher in a growing economy, right?
Right, yeah. There was a Cato study, a Cato Institute study recently that estimates that eliminating DACA will cost the economy about $200 billion a year. Because what's happened with these folks is they've gotten good paying jobs or real jobs. And because of the work permit, they're paying taxes. Mm-hmm. And if you take DACA away and they have to go back to an underground economy, they're not paying taxes. They're being paid under the table, and they're living in the shadows again. And so there's these counter arguments. First, they say that immigrants are a drain and they're on welfare. Well, under DACA, you can't apply for welfare and you don't get these benefits. And now all of a sudden they're a drain because they're taking jobs away. So which one is it? These people are trying to be productive. They're trying to live the American dream, and we're trying to take it away from them.
And the Pentagon says that they estimate about 900 DACA-eligible folks have enlisted and served, many of them quite honorably, Iraq and Afghanistan. So you've got that, too. Now, we're not sure. Some people who are DACA-eligible or DACA vetted are in the process of enlisting or going through training. What happens to them? Pentagon is not sure.
Well, and I would add to that, too, that all of the DACA recipients who I've spoken with this week took offense to a lot of those statements that Sessions made when he was announcing it. They felt that he was very inaccurately describing them. When I talked to them, one woman in particular talked about how he kept referring to public benefits, Social Security benefits, and she said, I've paid. Even before she had DACA, she said she'd paid taxes, paid into Social Security for something like 15 years. And she said, I never expected to get $1 back from that. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
All right. Well, that's a beautiful segue, naturally enough, into our next segment here, which is on the response. Besides the legal challenge, pushback against Trump's push to end DACA has come from several quarters. And Kate, as you said, you've interviewed a number of students this week. Tell us who they are and how they're organizing to kind of fight back from the grassroots level here.
Yeah, so the overwhelming sense that I've gotten from all of the DACA recipients I've interviewed is that they are going to push back on this. They're not going to go quietly. They are going to organize, they're going to rally, they're going to protest, they're going to get everyone that they possibly can to lobby Congress to do something about this. They're speaking out. People who before were hesitant to share their own stories about what they've done in their lives are coming forward and saying, I know that I need to share my story so that you can see who I am. So I think we're going to continue to hear from them quite a bit.
And it does seem as if there's a shift in public opinion. New York Times referenced a couple of polls on Friday. 58% of the American public says that the Dreamers should stay and even have a path to citizenship. Another 15% say stay but no path. And a very small percentage said boot them out. And about the same percentage, 56, are against the wall. Now this is a flip from the campaign, certainly, when the polls would suggest that people want that wall. Now I know nationwide polls, as we learned in the election, aren't worth a lot because that isn't how we do things. But it does seem to me that the American public is shifting in how they feel about these folks, maybe as they read some of these very, very and compelling stories about who these folks are.
Yeah. Art, talk about the response in San Diego, and we'll talk a little more about the students' interviews. But
yeah, we covered the rally that was on Tuesday at the County Administration Building, and it was not an angry response. It was not a torches and pitchfork and go get Trump. It was very positive. It was about telling the stories of who these Dreamers are. And they're real people, and they're just like me. I happen to have been born here. My parents came from Mexico legally. I was born here. These kids aren't any less American than I am just because of this technicality. They have no other country to go to. And it was really compelling to hear their stories and to see whether they served in the military or went to college, got a job. This is what we should be encouraging.
But Sessions' point, Jeff Sessions, is that this is what he rather sneeringly refers to as executive amnesty. That is to say, an amnesty that was not adopted by the Congress of the United States.
Yeah, but it wasn't amnesty. These people have no path to citizenship. It's just, it was a temporary stop on deportation.
You're not going to sell that, however,
no,
Jeff Sessions. And that'll be the argument in court. Is it an overstep? Did Obama create amnesty that he couldn't get through Congress?
And so to that point, when Sessions made his announcement, he says it's unconstitutional. We're going to send it back to Congress, the people that in 16 years haven't been able to do it. But then Trump comes out famously with a tweet saying, if Congress doesn't act, I will revisit it. Well, if it's unconstitutional and it was an overreach by Obama, then what could Trump possibly do later?
You're looking for logic out of the president.
Sorry about that.
In the next segment, we're going to get deeper into the politics. Getting back to the response, though, UT had a poll this week, too, locally here. What did that find, Kate?
Yeah, so about 51% of San Diegans who responded to the poll said that DACA is good for America. About 52% disagreed with ending the program, and about 63% agreed that Congress should do something about it. So it did look a little bit different when you break it down by political party. You can, I think, guess pretty easily what those party lines looked like.
Sure. Yeah. But overall, the majority said, keep these folks.
Public officials were almost completely unanimous in their support for the DACA program and their criticism for the impact on these kids. Many are adults now, but they came here as kids. Even our two Republican congressmen didn't have. They said DACA was overreach, but Congress needs to fix it. I mean, even Tuck and Hunter hedged a bit, and Republican Darrell Issa, of course. Darrell Issa said we've got to find a way through Congress to make this work for the Dreamers.
But we're in San Diego, Southern California. A lot of DACA folks or DACA eligible folks.
38,000.
Exactly. So in other words, a lot of people out there, a constituency. Most United States congressmen, their districts, no. And so while we may sense a groundswell of support, keep the program because of the disastrous effect it could have on these very fine young people, that feeling may not be in a lot of states where they have congressmen who vote.
Kansas, Iowa. I mean, Kansas is a case in point with Chris Kobach, who's also on head of Trump's
finding those 5 million illegal votes. That
he said that the proper thing to do with DACA recipients is deport them and their parents. And just for the record, his grandparents were from Germany, Bohemia, and Norway. It's interesting how, after you've been here a few generations, as most of us have,
pull up that drawbridge.
Yes.
Exactly. Kate, I want to get back a little bit to some of the leaders in universities and schools, and they're supporting these students too here, at least locally, from the ones you interviewed, right?
Yes, I've seen statements coming out from a lot of the different school systems here, both in terms of K through 12 and higher education campuses, addressing this and saying that they're in support of Dreamers. And then students themselves also, in the last several years, there's been a rise of student organizations on the different campuses around San Diego County that are specifically for either giving Dreamers a safe space to be friends with each other and talk about their stories, or for them and their friends and allies who might not themselves be Dreamers but sort of support their
And
cause.
besides the faculty and some of the schools and that leadership, the business community, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Chris, oddly enough, came out and supported this, usually friends of Republicans and their policies.
Well, the business community, especially the large business organizations, have been very much pro-DACA. The business community is concerned because 90% of DACA recipients are working. And if you take, that's 700 and something thousand, if you take that quickly out of the economy, that's going to have an impact. We're near full employment. The business community is worried about filling that gap that's created. And more fundamentally, the business community looks at the aging American population and says, where's that pool of young workers going to come from? And it's probably going to come from immigrants in general and DACA Dreamers in particular. So there's that concern. And, when you look at Trump's base, frankly, the base is kind of anti-business in a way, certainly anti-big business like Silicon Valley.
They're anti-elite, including me and you and all of us here. We're elite, as you know.
That's a great point about the population, though. And if you look at what's happening in other developed nations where their populations are shrinking because of low birth rates. I have 4 kids. I'm doing my part. But there are a lot of countries, a lot of competitive countries that are starting to lose their economic strength because of population shrinks. The United States in general does too. It's the population of immigrants that is creating a younger, growing population.
Workers to support Social Security, Medicare,
Absolutely.
the next generation.
And to grow the economy. And now all of a sudden, we want to limit legal immigration. We want to deport tens of thousands, 100,000, millions of people that are undocumented. And we start with the most productive of that entire group.
Yeah, the Dreamers are about 7% of the undocumented population, which is, 11, 12 million. What do you think? Does the president, and I notice some people, or the LA Times has referred to what he's up to as a Jedi mind game. He seems to be playing all sides. Does he try to broaden it out to Congress? Let's deal with the whole situation of undocumented, including my wall.
In 6
months. Is that what we're going to have?
And that's why nothing gets done in Congress, because they can't get anything done. They try to do, instead of doing the small things that are logical, that now 56% of the population supports, they try to put all these riders on it and try to get other things that they can't get done.
All right, another wonderful transition here you guys have come up with. Let's move on to politics. Donald Trump's journey to the White House was fueled by his relentless attack on immigrants. But as Trump has learned on many issues, campaigning and governing are vastly different things. Trump seemed to fulfill a campaign promise by ending DACA. But then he urged Congress to, quote, fix the program legislatively. On the same day, he tweeted he wants Congress to address immigration reform in a way that puts citizens first. He also tweeted that he'll revisit his decision on DACA if Congress doesn't. Chris, he's like a kid learning to ice skate all over the place here. How do you sum up his position? Could he even do it at this point?
Well, I think he wanted to placate his base, or what Ronald Reagan speechwriter Peggy Noonan calls his shrinking core. But he also didn't want to appear too cruel to the Dreamers. And the result, of course, is a mishmash. But I think there's a logic behind this. Look at Trump, the man. He's the son of an immigrant mother. 2 of his wives were immigrants, one from what was Czechoslovakia, Melania from what was Yugoslavia. He probably does have some firsthand knowledge about the challenges an immigrant faces in America. And I think there's a little, and you could see that in his off-the-cuff messages to Dreamers. Don't be worried; these are good kids. 2 tweets saying that if Congress didn't solve it, he'd come in. So he's trying to placate his base while also having some empathy for the Dreamers. I think the only hope is that Congress, particularly Democrats allied with centrist Republicans, make this a permanent fix.
And when John Kelly, retired Marine General Camp Pendleton, was the head of Department of Homeland Security, he was asked, are you thirsting to go after these folks if DACA is ended? And he came about as close as he could to saying, No. He said it is not a high priority unless they've got criminal records. So the logic of it, and it seems to me that while they will be very, very unsure of their futures, I don't see buses going down in Canto and other places filling up with folks and going directly to Oaxaca.
Well, if you look at what, like, the people who have been a focus and have been targeted, yes, there are people who are being picked up by immigration enforcement and put in the removal proceeding system who have criminal backgrounds. But there's also people who just have prior removal orders. People who came here, asked for asylum, were denied, they're automatically given a removal order. I've seen, if a child came with their parents and that happened to them, the child now has DACA. I've met people who are in that situation. So in that sense, those folks might be a priority because of that removal order anyway.
But isn't it hard to create a national policy through anecdotal stories? I mean, if you have 800,000 people, you're going to have a lot of compelling stories. Mm-hmm. Is that a way to make a national policy?
What's really missing here is leadership, though. For the president to say, I'm going to end this program in 6 months and kick it back to Congress, without any leadership. He doesn't say,
where's your guide or where's your blueprint?
Here's what I want Congress to do. We want to handle DACA or Dreamers or parents or whatever it is.
Right.
He just punts it back.
And if you screw it up, it's on you.
Right, and that's what he wants. Yeah. He wants to win on all sides. He wants to say, I didn't really end it. They can't fix it. Right. It's not really my fault. He's got to show some leadership. That's what he wanted to do. He ran for president. Mm-hmm. He's the boss.
But he wants his wall. I keep waiting for him to say, all right, you want this? How about my wall? I think that's, I will call that his trump card.
There might be some compromise there around adding some more segments to the wall, solving the Dreamer situation, making sure they can stay here. The other thing that's looming over this practically when you look at deportation is the cost of it. There was an estimate this morning by the Brookings Institution that it costs $12,500 to deport one person. So if you deported all 800,000 of the Dreamers, that's roughly $10 billion. That's twice the annual budget for ICE. Mm-hmm. I mean, whether or not we're a compassionate country, we have to worry about a budget.
Yeah. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, the wall is very interesting because, as you say, Tony, they've already brought up the issue. Well, this is a bargaining chip, the wall, for reinstating DACA, these sorts of simplistic ways to view it. But you've got maybe a couple $100 billion in emergency funds here with Harvey and now Irma bearing down on Florida. There's a lot of Republicans in southeastern states that don't really even want the wall. It's really kind of a non-starter for some of these folks.
I think even in Texas, the priorities have shifted. We wrote that last week in our paper that all this talk over years about secession from the country, from Texas. Mm-hmm. And as soon as there's a disaster, the first thing they do is ask for federal money.
And the Department of Defense wants a lot more money for various adventures they have in mind. So.
I think the wall that they're going to want in Texas is going to be flood walls, not border walls.
It could be a portion of the wall. I mean, you could add a few segments in San Diego and Texas and maybe Arizona and say, we've solved the problem, we've closed the holes, the gaps in the wall, and then you deal with
some more agents, some drones, some more cameras, and we've beefed up security.
Even Trump has said it's impractical to have a wall across the entire length.
Something face-saving for him is what you're suggesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Everybody gets a little bit, save their face, go back to their base, be it Pelosi or Trump, and say, I did what I could.
Geez, that's politics as it should work, huh, Kate?
I think the Dreamers are going to take pretty strong issue to that. Every single one of them who I've spoken with has also made it pretty clear that they're not willing to be a bargaining chip. They're not willing to accept protection at the expense of others who they care about. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be a bigger discussion than it sounds like.
There are real lives at stake here.
Now, what about this? We have a short time left. What about this political issue here with the 6-month clock ticking? Does that just get extended, or what happens? Because there's some folks who can't apply now. I mean, the ball is really rolling toward them. And
I just can't imagine that Congress can do anything in 6 months. And dealing with this very thorny issue. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine. There's going to have to be some extension, and that's what Trump kind of alluded to, saying if Congress doesn't act in 6 months, I will revisit it. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to continue to expand this and extend it until some real solution.
Although that 6 months throws us into an election year.
And although I don't know how important this issue is when you get to a lot of places in the hinterland, maybe it's less important than we think. It's a great issue for a presidential candidate, but what about Congressman Smedley from goodness knows where? But you're right. I mean, the idea that they can get this done, particularly if there's talk about, hey, let's expand this. This is just 7% of 12 million people. Let's talk about other things. I think the Congress will be absolutely frozen in place.
Yeah, well, we've about run out of time, but we're going to be obviously revisiting this issue as we move forward because it's not going anywhere, and the political fireworks between now and the end of the year, and certainly the 6-month deadline, will be upon us soon. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Chris Genuine of the Times of San Diego, former Los Angeles Times reporter Tony Perry, Kate Morrissey of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Art Costanaris of La Prensa. Thank you all for being here today. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.